At 2.4 million years ago, Earth was very different. There were no buildings, no cities, and no spoken language. The planet was ruled by nature and roaming animals larger than anything we see today. It was during this time that a new kind of being appeared. This early human was called Homo habilis. Unlike other creatures, Homo habilis began to use their hands and their minds. They broke stones to create sharp edges. They moved in small groups and stayed close to water and food. They were not just surviving, they were learning. These early humans didn't leave behind words or drawings, but they left behind clues, tools, bones, and burned wood. These are the first signs of memory, intelligence, and something more, consciousness. In this video, we'll explore what life looked like at that time. What was the climate like? Which animals ruled the land? How did early humans survive when danger was everywhere? 2.4 million years ago, Earth's climate was going through big changes. This was the start of a new chapter in the planet's history, what scientists call the Pleistocene epoch. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, over thousands of years, the world began to cool. Ice started to build up at the poles, and huge glaciers began to move. These ice sheets didn't stay in one place. They advanced, then melted, then advanced again. This back and forth cycle happened again and again. Each time the ice moved, it shaped the land. Glaciers carved deep valleys, created lakes, and pushed rocks across the ground. In some places, they formed entire river systems. You can still see their work today in the shape of mountains, hills, and plains across the world. These changes didn't just affect the land, they changed the weather too. The Earth's air became cooler and drier. Rainfall patterns shifted. Seasons grew longer and more extreme. Some places that had once been green and full of life turned into dry plains or deserts. Other areas flooded, froze, or dried up completely, depending on where the ice moved. Africa, especially East Africa, was heavily affected. Thick tropical forests began to disappear. In their place, open grasslands and dry savannas took over. This was not an easy change for plants, animals, or early humans. Many species that were used to forest life had to move, adapt, or die out. The new savannas had fewer trees, hotter days, and longer dry seasons. Life had to learn how to survive with less water and less cover from the sun. One of the most important places on Earth during this time was the Great Rift Valley in East Africa. This long stretch of land was shaped by massive movements in the Earth's crust. Tectonic plates pulled apart, forming deep valleys, cracks, and high ridges. Some volcanoes erupted, while others went quiet. These changes created a rough landscape filled with hills, rocky cliffs, and scattered lakes. Even though the environment was harsh, the Rift Valley offered something special: fresh water from lakes and rivers. That's why many animals and early humans gathered there. Water meant life. But the area wasn't always safe. Earthquakes could shake the ground, droughts could dry up water sources, and strong rains could flood everything in a day. Still, those who lived there had to adapt. Whether it was a herd of elephants looking for food, a lion hiding in tall grass, or a small group of Homo habilis finding a place to rest, survival meant adjusting to the land. Every change in the weather could bring a new challenge or a new chance. And that's what made this time so important. It wasn't just the cold or the heat. It was the fact that everything, land, sky, animals, and people, was shifting. And from that constant change, new ways of living began to take shape. By 2.4 million years ago, the shape of the continents was mostly the same as today. Africa was in its current position, so was Europe, Asia, and the Americas. But even though the land looked familiar from space, the world down below was still changing. One major shift had a big effect on Earth's climate and life in the oceans. It was the closing of the Isthmus of Panama, the narrow strip of land that connects North and South America. When that gap closed, it blocked the flow of water between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That small land bridge caused a huge change in the ocean currents. These changes helped cool the Earth's climate even more and marked the beginning of the Ice Age. In East Africa, the land was moving differently. The Great Rift Valley was tearing itself apart. Deep cracks opened in the ground as tectonic plates slowly pulled away from each other. The result was a rough, uneven landscape filled with valleys, cliffs, extinct volcanoes, and scattered freshwater lakes. It wasn't an easy land to live in, but it offered something very important: access to water. Rivers like the Omo and the Awash became lifelines. Around these water sources, life gathered. There were grassy patches where plants grew. Trees provided shade and food, and the water itself drew in animals of all kinds: zebras, antelopes, crocodiles, and big cats. Where prey came to drink, predators came to wait. And in the middle of it all, early humans tried to survive. Water didn't just quench thirst, it created entire ecosystems. Birds flew overhead looking for fish, insects buzzed around the plants, tiny mammals made their homes in the tall grass. For Homo habilis, finding a water source meant more than comfort. It meant food, safety, and sometimes danger, all in one place. That's why early human groups didn't just move randomly. They followed the land. They remembered where the rivers were. They stayed close to lakes during dry seasons and learned where animals came to drink. In a harsh and unpredictable world, water decided where life could exist. And wherever life gathered, learning began. During this time in history, the world wasn't quiet. It was full of sound, movement, and life, especially from animals. The landscape was open and wide, with large stretches of grass, scattered trees, and shallow waterholes. And on that land, many creatures ruled. Some of the most impressive animals on Earth lived 2.4 million years ago. Woolly mammoths, covered in thick fur, moved slowly across the grasslands, using their long, curved tusks to dig through snow and protect their young. Nearby, woolly rhinoceroses grazed in open areas. These were powerful animals with heavy bodies and sharp horns, and most predators stayed far away from them. There were also the giant deer, or Megaloceros, with massive antlers stretching over 3 meters wide. These creatures were strong and elegant, but also cautious. Every step they took through the grass carried weight, not just in size, but in the rhythm of nature. Alongside these giants were herds of zebras, antelopes, and wildebeests. They traveled in large numbers, moving from one place to another depending on the season. Their movements were not random. They followed water, food, and weather. These patterns became signs for early humans. When the herds moved, it often meant a shift in the season. It also meant food was either coming or leaving. Of course, where there's prey, there are predators. And back then, they were deadly. The most feared were the saber-toothed cats, like Smilodon. With their long, sharp fangs, they didn't need to chase their prey. One strike to the neck was usually enough. These cats hid in tall grass and moved silently. For early humans, hearing one meant danger was close. Then there were the giant hyenas, much larger than today's. They could crush bones with their jaws. They hunted in packs and often stole kills from other predators or humans. Leopards and cave bears also lived during this time, and both were skilled hunters. Cave bears could stand up to 3 meters tall, and in some cases, humans had to fight or flee when competing for shelter in caves. Early humans like Homo habilis were not at the top of the food chain. They couldn't outrun predators or fight them off easily, so they became smart about when to move and where to stay. Many times, they watched predators from a distance and waited until it was safe to approach the leftovers of a kill. That way, they could take meat or bone marrow without risking their lives in the hunt. Not all animals were big and dangerous. Some were small, but just as important. Rodents, lizards, and insects filled the land and were often easier to catch. Homo habilis could gather eggs, hunt small animals like rabbits, or even eat worms and bugs, all of which were good sources of protein. Then there were the birds. Some, like crows, became nature's messengers. When a group of crows gathered or flew in a certain direction, it could mean food or danger was nearby. These signals helped early humans decide where to go and when to be careful. Every animal, large or small, played a role in this early ecosystem. Some were threats, some were meals, and others were quiet teachers, helping humans learn the rules of the wild world they lived in. Among all the creatures living 2.4 million years ago, one stood out, not because it was the strongest or fastest, but because it could think, plan, and learn. That creature was Homo habilis, known as handyman, the first known species in the human family. Homo habilis was small, standing about 1.4 to 1.5 meters tall. They had long arms, curved fingers, and walked on 2 feet. Their bodies still looked a bit like apes, but their brains were growing. With a brain size of 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, They were smarter than any other creature of their kind that came before. They lived in small groups, often between 10 and 20 individuals. These groups moved together, searching for food, water, and safe places to rest. Life was dangerous, so cooperation was necessary. Each person had a role. Some watched for danger, others gathered roots and berries, and some used stones to cut meat or crack bones. Their survival wasn't about strength, it was about memory and observation. They remembered where water could be found. They watched how animals moved. They learned how to spot safe areas and which ones to avoid. And they shared that knowledge through gestures, sounds, and behavior. They preferred open areas like grasslands or plains, where they could see predators coming from a distance. At night, they rested near caves or rocky shelters. While they hadn't yet mastered fire, they may have seen it during lightning storms or wildfires. They began to understand that fire could be useful, not just dangerous. Homo habilis also began using tools. They broke stones to make sharp edges. These tools helped them cut meat, open bones, and protect themselves. It was a small step, but an important one. It meant they were thinking ahead. Though they didn't have language yet, they started forming early forms of communication. A look, a tap, a gesture, all of these carried meaning. Over time, these signs helped build a new kind of bond, trust within the group. In this tough world, every day was a fight to survive. But Homo habilis was not just surviving, they were changing. Slowly, they were building the first pieces of what we now call human nature. To do that, tools were developed and used. In a world where strength often decided who survived, Homo habilis found a different way. They didn't have claws or sharp teeth, but they had something that changed everything: tools. One of the biggest steps in early human history was the use of the Oldowan tool. These were not fancy or complicated. They were small stones that had been sharpened by striking one rock against another. But that simple action made a big difference. A sharpened stone could cut meat, smash bones, or scrape plants and skins. It gave early humans access to parts of an animal that others left behind, especially bone marrow, which was full of fat and nutrients. Getting bone marrow wasn't easy without tools, but with a sharp stone, Homo habilis could crack open large bones and reach what was inside. This new source of food gave them more energy and may have helped support their growing brains. What's most interesting is that making these tools wasn't random, it required planning. They had to pick the right type of rock, they had to hit it at just the right angle, and they had to remember how they did it so they could do it again. This shows that Homo habilis had not just hands but thoughtful hands. They could see the purpose of a rock before using it. That's a sign of foresight, something only intelligent species do. These tools were often shared within small groups. While one person broke rocks, another might be gathering food or watching for danger. Others looked after the children. This shows the beginning of role division. Not everyone did the same task, and that's another step toward the development of early culture. Even though they didn't have a spoken language, early humans were learning from each other. They didn't teach with words, they taught by doing. A child would watch an adult break a rock or peel bark from a tree. Over time, they copied these actions, and if something worked well, others picked it up too. This is called social learning, and it's one of the key things that makes human beings different from other animals. The tools themselves also tell us something about how early humans lived. They often left them behind at certain spots, near rivers, caves, or open spaces. This suggests that they returned to the same places again and again. These places became shared memory points, like early versions of camps or temporary homes. It's clear that the use of tools didn't just help early humans survive. It helped them connect, cooperate, and grow smarter together. Each time they broke a stone, shared a task, or taught a child, they were laying down the first stones, not just of survival, but of human culture itself. And with every tool they made, they took one more step away from instinct, and one step closer to being human. Life for Homo habilis was always on the move. They didn't stay in one place or build homes. Instead, they lived nomadically, moving with the seasons, the herds, and the water. If animals moved to find fresh grass, or if a water source dried up, the group moved too. Staying in one spot for too long could mean running out of food, or running into danger. Each day was shaped by one goal: survival. To stay alive, they needed to work together. And since they didn't have language like we do today, they found other ways to communicate. A long stare could mean, "Stay alert." A hiss might warn of nearby danger. A quick hand tap could say, "Let's move." These small nonverbal signals helped them understand each other and stay connected. Over time, early humans started to fall into natural roles. The men often took on tasks that required traveling longer distances. They scouted new paths, looked for animal remains, and checked the surroundings for safety. The women usually stayed closer to the group. They gathered fruits, roots, and small plants, and they looked after the children. These weren't rules, they were habits, shaped by the dangers of the world around them. Children were not taught through words or formal lessons. Instead, they watched. They saw how adults gathered food, broke stones, or kept an eye out for animals. Then they copied what they saw. Sometimes they made mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes were dangerous. But that's how they learned, one action at a time. What makes this period so important isn't just how early humans survived, but how they began to feel. Even without words, their behavior showed signs of emotion. When someone got injured, others helped. When food was found, it was often shared. If a group member didn't return, others waited or searched. These actions showed early forms of anxiety, joy, and grief. They couldn't say what they felt, but their choices made it clear. Living in groups was not optional, it was necessary. Alone, a person was vulnerable. In a group, there was protection. Someone could watch for danger while others rested. If a child wandered off, another adult might guide them back. And when a predator was nearby, the group could stay silent together or scatter to survive. This kind of group thinking depended on trust and memory. They remembered where the safe places were. They remembered who had helped them. And they remembered how to move as one. That memory, shared silently between people, became the glue that held the group together. Daily life wasn't easy, but through those small routines, moving, watching, sharing, Homo habilis laid the early foundations of human connection. They were learning not just how to live, but how to live together. Long before dogs became pets, something very different happened. The first connection between humans and wolves was not built on love or trust, it was built on survival. In the cold and dangerous world 2.4 million years ago, early wolves like Canis rufus lived on the edge. They weren't strong enough to compete with larger predators, but they were smart. They started scavenging near human camps, looking for scraps, leftover bones, bits of meat, or anything they could eat. At first, early humans didn't like this. They chased the wolves away. But over time, they noticed something. These wolves didn't attack. In fact, they often gave early warnings. A low growl in the night could mean a leopard was nearby. A change in the wolves' behavior might hint at something dangerous in the dark. Humans began to tolerate them, not as pets, but as useful outsiders. This started a quiet pattern. Humans left food behind, the wolves came back, and both sides kept their distance. But as this happened again and again, things slowly began to shift. Some wolves were more cautious and less aggressive. These were the ones that stayed close, and humans began to recognize them. Maybe they stopped throwing stones. Maybe they started leaving a larger bone or a scrap of meat on purpose. Nothing was said, but the meaning was clear. You stay near, I'll share. Over many generations, this silent relationship grew stronger. These wolves followed human groups during hunts or travels. They watched for danger, and in return, they were fed and accepted, though always at arm's length. Then one day, something changed. A wolf didn't stay at the edge of the camp. It curled up nearby. A child may have reached out, curious but unafraid. The wolf didn't growl, it simply rested. And in that moment, the first thread of trust was formed. This wasn't yet friendship, but it was the beginning of something deeper. A bond built on routine, safety, and need. Over time, that bond would evolve into loyalty, protection, and what we now call companionship. And it all started with a bone left behind and a wolf that chose to stay. 2.4 million years ago, the world was wild. From those first tools to the beginnings of trust, the story of Homo habilis shows us something important. The road to modern life, filled with houses, art, technology, and language, didn't start with power. It started with memory, emotion, and intention. So when we share a meal, help a stranger, or feel grief when someone we love is gone, we are continuing something that began long ago. A quiet thread that links us to the very first humans. A reminder that being human has always meant more than just survival. It has meant feeling, remembering, and reaching out to others. It has meant building connections that outlast a single lifetime, shaping stories passed from one generation to the next. In every gesture of care, We echo the ancient roots of what it truly means to be human.